Good morning, Grace Church. Pastor Levi here with the daily devotional from Mark, chapter 1, verses 21 through 34. Hopefully, you saw the video from Pastor Rick yesterday talking about the way we're going to move through the book of Mark over these next few weeks and look at Jesus' authority over all kinds of different things. And I have to tell you, I was so excited when I saw what my topic for the devotional was today. The email came and it said, Jesus' authority over unclean spirits or demons and sickness. I just don't talk about those things all the time, so I thought, oh my goodness. But as I dug in, I realized this really is good for where we're at. I want to start by asking you a question. Have you ever had one of those friends, or maybe it's a family member, that they love to read and they find an author and then they begin reading all the stuff from this author. You're not particularly reading it, and they're always quoting something that this person said. And every conversation, I was reading this book and this guy said this. They never really speak of their own opinion or on their own authority, but they're really into what this other person had said. Well, in the church back in Jesus' day, when they would meet together in a synagogue, there would be an educated rabbi or religious teacher, and they would get up, and this is what they did. They would always speak about something that Moses said or one of the prophets from the Old Testament said. And so they're always referring back to something that somebody else was speaking of. And so at the very first part of this, verse 21, it says, they went to Capernaum. At once on the Sabbath, Jesus went into the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his teaching. He wasn't like the legal teachers. He said things on his own authority. So he wasn't doing what everybody else was doing. He wasn't referring back to Moses. He wasn't referring back to the prophet. He had his own opinion and was speaking on his own authority, and people began to take notice. Now, right in the middle of this church service, there was a man with an unclean spirit. The unclean spirit recognized Jesus for who he was, began speaking to Jesus. Jesus tells that unclean spirit, you need to come out of this guy, and you need to be quiet. And the unclean spirit gave like a final shriek and came out of the man, and Scripture tells us everyone was astonished. What's this? They started to say to each other, new teaching with real authority. He even tells the unclean spirits what to do, and they do it. People began to realize that Jesus had authority over unclean spirit and even sickness. The story goes on, and it tells us about how Simon's mother-in-law was ill, and Jesus goes in and heals her, and then goes on to bring healing to many other people. And one of the things in this passage that people are really hung up on is the authority that Jesus has over these situations. And I don't know if you've ever run into somebody that has actual authority. A few weeks ago, I had to call in because we were paying too much for our home internet service. And the first person I got on the phone with, they could not help me. They were not offering me any deals that were better than what we already had. So I went up another rung, talked to the supervisor. They really couldn't help me. So about the third person that I talked to had authority to make a decision. They could help me out of my situation. They could help me get my bill lower. And so people began to recognize that Jesus had authority and could help them in the situations in which they found themselves in. Now, in the U.S., we don't recognize or see a lot of demon possession. It isn't something that is in the church world that I find myself in. It's very, it just doesn't, we don't see it very often. But this kind of stuff is still happening worldwide. The rest of the world isn't like the Western church. And so to know that Jesus has authority over unclean spirits, over sickness, can bring an unbelievable amount of peace and calm. One of my favorite writers or theologians is N.T. Wright, and he says this: when the church learns again how to speak and act with the same authority, we find both the saving power of God unleashed once more and a similar heightened opposition from the forces of darkness. Similar but not the same. The demons knew Jesus and knew he had come to defeat them once and for all. They can still shriek, but since Calvary, they no longer have authority. Now get this. To believe this is key to Christian testimony our story of what God is doing in saving action in the world, that despite its frequent panic and despair, has already been claimed by the loving authority of God in Jesus. There is plenty of panic. There is plenty of despair in the world around us. There is a lot that is scary in the world around us. May we find comfort in knowing that Jesus has authority over that once and for all. The scary things in our life do not get the final say. And I hope that this brings peace and comfort and joy and hope to where you find yourself. We are not people of panic and despair because Jesus has authority over the scary things in our life. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great day, and we'll come back at you tomorrow with another daily devotional.